February 22nd, 1977. "Hey," the man yelled out across the office, his hand covering the mouthpiece of the telephone he held. "Sloan just had a massive cerebral hemorrhage, dead as a hammer in Washington." His friend sat bolt upright, his mind was racing, and he was already thinking several steps ahead to the special election that would have to be held to replace the dead congressman. "Carter's only been in office a month. Maybe we could make some hay on this one." "Some other well-intentioned guy out of left field, you mean?" He began to smile. The idea was definitely appealing. Somebody we can control. His smile grew broader, then his brows furrowed. "Gotta be someone white, though. Might backfire if we try to sneak in another Clay," he warned. The second man nodded in this assessment. There were limits, after all. The goal was to always expand them. "Yeah," he said, nodding his head. "What we need is somebody who can tell the people what they want to hear and doesn't have some stupid agenda that can get us into trouble." Shit. That doesn't narrow down the field much. "Yeah, but somebody young and good-looking and who can smile without looking like Eleanor Roosevelt, so the voters will want to pay more taxes. Makes it harder." Suddenly, the two men's heads snapped towards each other. "Dick Gaines," they said in unison. Missouri's next U.S. congressman for the 3rd District had just been chosen. April 9th, 1978. "I won't ask what was going through your mind when you signed this," the senior accountant from Ernst & Whitney said with a smile as he took the check and placed it with the other documents for delivery to the IRS. "Please don't." Henry Bowman's face was utterly without expression, and his tone of voice told the accountant he wanted no further discussion. "You need me for anything else?" "No, I think we're all set." "Then I'll be going." Henry turned on his heel and left the office. The entire way home, Henry Bowman thought about just how much he had come to despise both the socialist policies in his country's government had adopted and the people who had forced those policies on the public. "Isn't that why this nation was formed, to get away from this very thing?" he asked himself over and over. As Henry walked into the kitchen, he hung his jacket over the back of a chair. The house still didn't feel right to him, with his mother gone. Every time he walked through the doorway, he half expected to see her, especially after being away on a job for several days. Catherine Bowman had died very suddenly of a heart attack almost a year before while carrying a box of plants from her station wagon to the pantry off the kitchen. She was 61 years old. Henry had moved out of his apartment and back into the house he had grown up in to undertake the arduous task of settling his mother's estate. The 55% haircut appalled him. Henry Bowman had known that taxes would be bad, but losing over half of everything his parents owned was a shock. Estates of less than $175,000 were not taxed. Above that figure, taxes quickly rose to a staggering 77% on estates of over $10 million. The law allowed 9 months to come up with the money, which meant selling a lot of things. Henry had reluctantly come to the conclusion that keeping the family summer property would mean selling all the stocks and bonds, and the country place was maintenance intensive. Without income from savings to maintain it, Henry had seen that its upkeep would bankrupt him. It was now being subdivided for development, and the entire proceeds from the sale, along with his mother's entire bond portfolio and much of the stocks, had just gone to the IRS. And the estate tax program doesn't even break even, Henry thought with disgust. He had scarcely believed it when the accountant told him, but it made sense. Very few people saved $175,000 in property and other assets. Estates of those few people who conserved and invested their assets successfully enough to rise above this level generated less taxes than the costs of an administration. The estate tax wasn't there to help pay for things the country needed. It was there to prevent Americans from passing their property and their savings on to their descendants, shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. That's what Andrew Carnegie said. Henry closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He did not like feeling angry like this. He opened the door to the basement stairs, flicked on the light switch, and descended the steps to the woodworking shop that Walter Bowman had built and that had been Henry's for the last decade. The smell relaxed him immediately. Henry went to the partially finished gun stock that was clamped in the padded jaws of the bench vise. He ran his hand over the Bass stone walnut, taking in the wonderful scent of his favorite wood. The Enfield Action, barreled in 500 Buehmiller, lay on the bench behind the stock. "This one's going to be pure poison when I get too tired to carry my Rhoda," Henry thought. Design weight for the 5-shot magazine rifle was 10.5 pounds. It would fire a 600 grain, 510 thousandths bullet at 2,400 feet per second, as opposed to the 458, which threw a smaller 500 grain slug at 2,250 feet per second, using strong hand loads. Factory 458 offerings sent the same bullet out at less than 2,000 feet per second. The unfinished rifle made Henry think about his impending safari to Rhodesia, and his spirits lifted considerably. Got to get this stock finished if I want to practice any before I go. His Rhodesian safari was scheduled for the entire month of September. Henry Bowman lifted his artist paintbrush out of a small pot of oil and lampblack and gave the underside of the barrel receiver a thin coat of the wet mix. Then he hollowed the metalwork into the stock, pressed it firmly, and lifted it out again. Henry inspected the wood closely, looking at every place that was blackened where the metal had touched it. About 75% contact. He shook his head. Abe Van Horn wouldn't settle for 75%, Henry said to himself, referring to the stockmakers whose work he admired most. He chose a round-end scraper from several dozen that were in a rack on his bench and went to work. Have the people in this country lost their minds? Congressman Gaines demanded. His aide knew better than to answer questions such as that and remained silent. Listen to this. All across the country, a disturbing trend is taking shape. Americans are stockpiling food and rediscovering home canning in preparation for what they see as the inevitable result of runaway inflation, unchecked government spending, and the abdication of U.S. strength and respect abroad. The debate about the Panama Canal is but one of many examples of what these citizens view as drastically weakened foreign policy, with ultimate consequences much more serious than mere loss of pride. These people call themselves survivalists, and they are not wringing their hands, they are taking action. Survivalists are learning mechanical skills, they are storing massive amounts of consumables, not only food, but diesel fuel, gasoline, and goods for barter. They are planting large vegetable gardens and digging wells on their own property. Any money they have left after these large purchases of basic necessities is used to buy gold. These measures are the only protection survivalists feel they can give their families in the event that economic disaster does come to pass. He put down the magazine and stared across the lunch table at his subordinate. What kind of crap is this? He asked rhetorically. Richard Gaines had been reading a national news magazine, quoting from one of the many current articles describing a phenomenon which was occurring all across the country. Suddenly he thought of something. I thought it was illegal to buy gold. Gerald Ford changed that when he was in office, Congressman. That fool, Gaines sneered. The aide did not point out to the young congressman that gold had been the underlying asset for the world's major monetary systems for thousands of years, and it was Franklin Roosevelt, with a huge majority in both Congress and the Senate, who had unhitched the currency from its anchor and made it a federal crime for U.S. citizens to own this basic store of value. That happened in 1934, a year that saw other federal proposals with far-reaching implications for the American public become law. What can we do about this? Gaines demanded. His aide opened his mouth to speak, but realized he hadn't the vaguest idea what the congressman was after. Strengthen foreign policy? Not much the young congressman can do there. Pledge to introduce no legislature unless it repealed spending programs? It'd be interesting to see how his constituents reacted to that. The aide shrugged in reply. Richard Gaines was obviously pondering his own question. I could introduce a bill prohibiting ownership of more than, say, a month's worth of basic necessities. Exemption for bona fide producers, of course, farmers and all that. Go through the records of all the bulk sellers, look for individual purchasers. Any excess food they've got over the 1-month limit, take it and put it into a government-administered fund to be sold at below market rates to the people who are below the poverty line. That'd look good to the public. Make these crazy end-of-the-world types give their food to people who really need it. He chewed his lip, thinking. Couldn't do the same thing very easily with gas or diesel, so we'd have a line in there prohibiting home storage. Make it a crime to have more than 10 gallons aside from what was in your car and lawnmower. Underground tanks would have to be filled in. Richard Gaines was pondering other elements of his bill when a large, weathered hand was laid on his shoulder. Son, I just finished eating dinner at the next table, and I couldn't help but hear you telling your friend about this idea of yours for a bill. The speaker was a large man with white hair in his 70s or early 80s. Before you get your secretary to type it up for you, I think you might want to reread the Constitution, because right now you've got several problems that are going to come up and bite you. Like that plan you got to take what people's been hoarding, put it in a government fund. Going to run smack into the Fifth Amendment, I'm afraid, taking property like that without compensation. Now, finding out who to take it from, that's going to butt heads with the Fourth Amendment. That's the one about unreasonable search and seizure, in case you forgot. Might even get some squawk on the 10th Amendment, because though that one's a little shaky. Anyway, thought you might want to think about those things a bit before you start figuring that since the Constitution was written a couple hundred years ago by some fellows who dressed and talked kind of funny, it's not of much interest, except to college professors writing about ancient history. He chuckled as he thought of something. Last fellow in this town who felt that way got in a whole mess of trouble, you may recall. The man lifted his hands from Gaines' shoulder, nodded once, and walked towards the exit. Who the hell was that old goat? Gaines asked his aide when the older man had left the restaurant. The stranger had been exactly right in his assumption about the young congressman's view of the Constitution, and it irritated Gaines to be talked to like someone in grade school. Senator Sam Ervin. He eats here sometimes. Retired 4 years ago after he finished up his job as chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities. The aide saw Gaines' blank look and continued, You know, the Watergate hearings? Ended up with Nixon resigning? Oh, yeah, I thought I'd seen him somewhere before, Gaines said. Look, the aide said to his boss, wanting to get back in good humor and recognizing how to do it. What he said about the Fifth and Fourth Amendments, that's true as far as it goes, but that's only a problem when you try to do what you want head on. What do you mean? Well, the aide said as he chewed a bite of steak and gestured with his fork, when you try to pass progressive laws and do what's best for the country, a lot of times the people will resist. At least when you try to do too much too fast. You know about the Fabian Society in England? Gaines shook his head. The aide smiled and took a deep breath. He loved political history and didn't get to talk about it very often. Here was a chance to look good for the boss. Fabian Society was a political organization founded in the 1880s in Great Britain. Their ultimate goal was to establish a socialist government in England. They knew if they came out and said that, though, their ideas would be rejected immediately by the majority of people. So they began to gradually educate the public by publishing essays that explained the benefits of socialist ideas, and they framed their ideas in terms that would appeal to the influential upper class, because those are usually the people that can get things done. Anyway, because of this strategy, they were very successful. They were the major force behind the Labor Representation Committee that was founded at the turn of the century. He saw Gaines's blank look and added, The LRC was what became England's Labour Party. So, Gaines asked. He didn't see where this was going, and he was getting bored with talk about England. So they got what the Fabians had always wanted, the aide said hurriedly. At least a lot of it. The Labour Party won by a landslide in 45, and Prime Minister Attlee was able to finally create a welfare state in England, which was a real coup. Within 2 years, they had free medical care for everyone. The government owned the Bank of England, and they'd let India, Pakistan, Ceylon, and Burma go. Within 5 or 6 years, they had nationalized a quarter of the country's industry. The aide did not mention that these policies resulted in a massive trade deficit, subsequent food rationing, and drastic devaluation of the pound sterling. It went without saying that in all socialist endeavors, certain inconveniences had to be tolerated by individuals for the greater good of the public as a whole. The aide's eyes were bright as he stared at the congressman. It never could have happened all at once, and that's what I think we need to keep in mind. So 50 years is what you're telling me? Gaines asked with irritation. No, not at all, the aide said quickly, shaking his head vigorously. We got our welfare state over 40 years ago, and what you were just talking about, wanting to ban hoarding and distribute the survivalist food to the poor, you don't happen to listen to that old asshole preach about how your law would violate the Constitution. You don't even need to pass a new law at all. We've already got the power. What do you mean? Gaines asked. The Emergency Power Act gives the president the authority to do whatever he wants in a time of national emergency. It was meant to be invoked in the event of a nuclear war, but there's nothing in it that specifies that particular circumstance. If the president wants to, he can use it, order the army to seize all the people's stockpiles of food, diesel fuel, gold, guns, whatever. Nationwide curfew, censor the press, you name it. He can do it under the Emergency Power Act. Money, too, if the president says no taking money out of the country, even a few $100s, boom, it's a crime. Freeze your assets, seize assets, anything he wants. So we've got the authority already, but it takes special circumstances, huh? I guess the next step is to make the circumstances less unusual, right? Gaines said. That's it, his aide replied with a grin. The people won't give up the things they think they're entitled to if you try to take them all at once. You need to start with something that sounds so innocuous that you can ridicule anyone that opposes you, then expand it. Do what the Fabian Society did. Treat it just as you would a salami, a slice at a time. The congressional aide was well versed in his political history, but he was ignorant of the National Firearms Act of 1934. If he had been familiar with that particular piece of legislation, however, he could have used it as a textbook example of the strategy he was advocating.